2022 has been a number of anniversaries. We had the anniversary of Ulysses' publication, we had the anniversary of the treaty, and of course the anniversary of the subsequent Civil War. Now, I'd love to introduce Michelle Paull, a historian. We want to talk about Sean OCasey because he wrote a trilogy of plays in the early 20s which were performed at the Abbey Theatre, the Dublin Trilogy, and they very much represented his experience of what it had been like to live through events from the Easter Uprising, through the signing of the treaty, through to the subsequent the War of Independence and the subsequent Civil War. What was happening with Sean Casey during that period?
Well, he was trying to capture a dialogue, I think, about what was going on in the country at that time, and to have that dialogue through theatre. So rather than write a political tract or set out to another meeting, he wanted to engage the public on stage. So going to the Abbey Theatre, putting his plays on stage, is a way of raising those questions about history in a theatrical form to try and draw in his audience to a debate about what's happened, what was right, what's gone wrong, what can we learn, how can we develop in the future. So he's using theatre as a means of communication and a means of interacting with the public as a way of raising topics for discussion.
He'd been involved in political events before that. Shadow of a Gunman was the very first play that was accepted by the Abbey Theatre. That's almost autobiographical in a tangential way.
Absolutely, in some ways. I mean, O'Casey lived in a shared room, and he had an experience of being arrested by and taken out, drawn out of his bed in just the way that happens in the play. He's writing about lived experience. He's writing about from the experience of actually having lived amongst people who've experienced the kind of realities of the day-to-day impact of violence in the streets and in their homes, and he's putting that experience on stage. So it's in great contrast to kind of Yeats's very mythical, lyrical, recapturing old traditions. He's very much about, so what's going on now? What was going on recently? What kinds of things have I experienced that I can share with the audience?
Yeah, the protagonist is a man called Davrin, and he is a poet. And tell us about what's the Shadow of the Gunman mean? So
he's a poet, and he's living in a shared accommodation, and he's believed to be a gunman on the run. He's believed to be an IRA member, and he's hiding out. The rest of the tenement occupants believe him to be hiding out, and so they're all kind of keeping his secret for him, helping him to maintain his sort of under the wire existence. And all the time he's simply a man who's gone there to try and write and is trying to, get his creative work out there. But there's this mystique around him because he's connected with all of this kind of Republican activity, and he's considered a great guest in the tenement, and they're really excited that he's there and doing everything they can to support and protect him.
The writing about the experience of living in a tenement is very authentic, isn't it?
Absolutely. And when you come on to the later plays, you've got families of 4-6 people sharing 2 rooms, and there'll be 12 of those rooms in a tenement. So you've got a whole house which might, today would be occupied by very wealthy individuals, is probably being shared by 20 to 30 people. We're talking about abject poverty of Dublin that he's actually delineating in the plays very clearly.
It was a massive hit, wasn't it?
A huge hit.
Shadow of a Gunman.
A huge hit. And this is the play that really begins to launch O'Casey's reputation, but it's as he comes on to then Juno that really solidifies him in the public mind. But this is the play that establishes him as the voice of the urban experience of Dublin and the urban working class being given their voices.
It's also great that it's W.B. Yeats who's running the Abbey Theatre and who commissions O'Casey, and O'Casey during that play is still working
Absolutely.
He's working every day.
Yeah.
He's labouring. I don't know what he's doing.
Yeah, he's labouring. He's working on the railways. So when it comes later on to the event to publicise Juno in the evenings, he says, "Well, I'm very sorry, I can't go because I'm busy. I'll need to go home and get my tea after work, and then I need to get up for work in the morning."
Yeah.
So he's very definitely a working writer. He's part of those people that he's writing about.
Amazing.
We're also delighted to have with us Tony Rohr.
So Tony is here today because he actually appeared in The Shadow of a Gunman in Scotland in a famous production at the Bar Theatre, and this sequence, Michelle, that Tony's reading is it's really a pacifist point of view, is it? Is that what?
Well, it's airing those views, isn't it? It's saying, what's it all been for? What's this all about? What is it worth it? All taking to arms? Have we achieved anything? Is it worthwhile? It's OCasey offering these questions, really. Yeah.
So, Tony, you're going to read this piece for us, are you?
Yes.
Lovely.
A couple of speeches.
One. Go for it. Tell us.
The village cock had thrice done salutation to the morn. Shakespeare, Richard III, Act 5, Scene 3. It was Radcliffe said that to Richard just before the Battle of Bosworth. How peaceful the heavens look now, with the moon in the middle. You'd never think there were men prowling about trying to shoot each other. I don't know how a man who has shot anyone can sleep in peace at night. There's plenty of men can't sleep in peace at night now unless they know that they have shot somebody. I wish to God it was all over. The country has gone mad. Instead of counting their beads now, they're counting bullets. Their Hail Marys and Paternosters are bursting bombs, and the rattle of machine guns. Petrol is their holy water. Their mass is a burning building. Their deep profundus is the soldier's song. And their creed is, I believe in the God Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. And it's all for the glory of God and the honour of Ireland. I remember the time when you yourself believed in nothing but the gun. Aye, when there wasn't a gun in the country. I've a different opinion now, when there's nothing but guns in the country. And you daren't open your mouth. For Kathleen the Houlihan is very different now to the woman who used to play the harp and sing, weep on, your hour is past. For she's a raging devil now, and if you only look crooked at her, you're sure of a punch in the eye. Well, this is the way I look at it. I look at it this way. You're not going to beat the British Empire. The British Empire by shooting an occasional Tommy at the corner of an occasional street. Besides, when the Tommies have the wind up, they let bang at everything they see. They don't give a God's cost who they plug. It's the civilians that suffer. When there's an ambush, they don't know where to run. Shot in the back to save the British Empire, and shot in the breast to save the soul of Ireland. I'm a nationalist myself, right enough, but all the same, I'm a nationalist, right enough. I believe in the freedom of Ireland, and that England has no right to be here. But I draw the line when I hear the gunmen blowing about dying for the people, when it's the people that are dying for the gunmen. With all due respect to the gunmen, I don't want him to die for me. Death is here and death is there, death is busy everywhere. Aye, in Ireland. Thanks be to God, but I'm a daily communicant. There's great comfort in religion. It makes a man strong in time of trouble, and brave in time of danger. No man need be afraid with a crowd of angels around him. Thanks be to God for his holy religion.
Wow, that's amazing.
Tony Rohr, well done.
Tony Rohr, one of Ireland's great actors. One of Ireland's great actors. He's in the Long Good Fridays, on lots of feature films, just absolutely amazing. Father Ted, lots of OCasey plays.
And in the season of Thaddeus
Tassie.
O'Sullivan films this weekend.
Yeah, this weekend he's in films by Thaddeus O'Sullivan.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you. Wonderful, Tony.
Thank you, Tony. It's quite interesting that, because that was Seamus, wasn't it, who's Davron's roommate,
That's right.
and he's a disillusioned nationalist. And the irony in some ways of Shadow of a Gunman is that Minnie falls, another woman in the tenement, Minnie falls in love with Davron because of his being a gunman. So he becomes seduced by his own false mystique.
Yeah, I think Casey's always very keen to look at demystifying myths and investigating how mystique arises and the damaging consequences of establishing that kind of false perception of anybody. And so Minnie is the great heroine. I mean, she takes over. She's the brave person at the end. She saves them. So it's this kind of strong female dynamic force that comes in, and she is as a female figure is something that's very common to O'Casey's plays. That sense of the female dynamism, the female capability, the female sensibility, being the one which actually makes the decisions, resolves situations, changes the way outcomes happen.
So, Shadow of a Gunman, sorry, were you going to say something, Shane? Shadow of a Gunman paves the way for Juno and the Paycock, and that is the play that's even more successful, if anything, and still performed on a regular basis today. Yeah,
it's still O'Casey's most successful play, the most performed play of the O'Casey canon now. Even today, it's the one that gets the most productions. And it was a phenomenal success at the time. It ran for the first week. It was sold out, and because of the number of people who wanted to see it, they had to bring it back for an extra week run later in the month. So it was phenomenally successful with audiences, and they were passionately responding to the dynamics of that play.
And does that follow similar themes?
Well, that is very much about investigating the kind of the consequences of a principle's a principle, I suppose, is one of the key phrases from the play. And what does it cost a working man and a working family to be involved in a situation of violence? So Johnny, the young son in Johnny Boyle, the young son in the play, has lost his arm in the fighting during the Easter Rising, and he has therefore unable to work as a working man, and so his future is based on this. A principle is a principle, but what will that mean for him in practical senses? So there's a lot of that kind of investigation. What happens when you are following these political principles to the nth degree? Do we need some compromise? Do we need a bit of pragmatism? What do we need to try and resolve such situations?
It's also I was in this play as a young bad actor, but
who knew?
Yeah,
amazing.
But it's interesting that the play is following the Rising. It's following the Jim Larkin strike, when people were starving in the city of Dublin. I mean, Dublin really was one of the most awful places to live in Europe at that time. It's hard to believe the misery and that's captured, but also through Juno, her strength
absolutely
throughout it. And
I mean, O'Casey ran the one of the charities which were involved in supporting women and children during the lockout as well. So he was deeply involved in supporting females affected by the violence. And yes, I mean, it's Juno who comes out of the play as the one who makes the sensible decisions, arranges, the way to look after the family, and so the future is female, because obviously she says at the end of the play, when Mary Boyle is having her child, Mary's concerned it won't have a father, and Juno's famous response is, it'll be even better, it'll have two mothers. Yeah, so there's that sense of the development of Ireland will be definitely in a double female form if possible.
While Joxer and the Paycock go around saying, what are the stars?
Yes.
What are the stars?
And everything's in a status chassis, and she's saying, well, okay, let's
That's actually very interesting. the estate of chassis. He was very good at Dublinism's language.
Yeah,
he
totally,
really was.
Totally. Yes, and he is very accurate in the way he depicts the language, and audience members listening to the play afterwards say, I've heard people speaking like that. I know that phrase. He's been listening kind of to us. And so it's a real literal sense of him putting the voice of the people on stage. He's literally allowing them to speak in their own voice, in their own way.
At the time, brilliant.
The response to Juno is basically uniformly positive, and there's again just that sheer joy that the voice of the working person is being heard.
That's us on stage.
Yeah, and that experience is being given the national stage to present itself. So
it all goes a bit belly up with you. I know you're going to come to Piers. It all goes belly up in the final trilogy, The Plough and the Stars.
So what was it about The Plough and the Stars which elicited this negative reaction in a way the first two hadn't?
I think there was an assumption on the part of the audience, or some members of the audience, that OCasey was being disrespectful to the heroes of Easter Week. And I think that really OCasey wanted to, again, go back to questioning those kinds of mystiques that had occurred around certain individuals, particularly Patrick Piers. And so the audience, led by Hannah-She Skeffington, whose husband Francis had been killed in the Easter Rising, mounted the stage in protest, and there were suggestions that the flag of the ICA would never have been unfurled in a pub as it is in one of the acts of the play. So they're looking at the nature of representation really and saying he seems to be questioning the heroics, and in a way he is. He's questioning how do these people come to have their reputation, but in actual fact, he was deeply sympathetic, deeply admired Francis She Skeffington, would never have insulted his memory or anything of his actions at all. But he was looking at the way that whole atmosphere of adulation was encouraging further violence and the continuation of violence and division in the country, and trying to ask the audience to think about this. Yeah.
It's amazing. You touched on it, that Francis She Skeffington, who was murdered in 1916 by a British officer, he was an ardent suffragist. He was an ardent pacifist, and OCasey knew him. And I still, Hannah, what were you doing that night? You were led astray.
He was the first victim of the 1916 Rising.
It was,
He did, and I think they did eventually come to a kind of understanding. But I think there was just a misunderstanding of what OCasey was trying to do. He wasn't trying to attack anyone personally, except perhaps Piers, or the myth of Piers. Again, he's not trying to attack him, but the way that those messages become manipulated and distorted. I mean, this is something we're all really familiar with now in contemporary politics, isn't it? But this is OCasey really leading the way in actually asking us, what do these words mean? Where have these reputations come from? How do people establish themselves as this kind of heroic being? And what's at the base of it all?
It's a great play. And sorry if I may, Piers. He then, in a way, like Joyce, and he suffered from bad eyesight like Joyce. He then wanders out of the Emerald Isle. He goes to England and he says, I'm here because here nobody cares who you are. But he had to close the door, and then he became an international with Cock-a-Doodle Dandy and his international anti-war plays and so on.
Absolutely.
So I think he moved to Surrey or somewhere.
No, it's Devon.
Chalfont St Giles didn't he as well? Yeah, and down into Devon and Totnes as well. He was beginning. I think he's always been an internationalist. I think the opposition to the Silver Tassie from Yeats and even from Lady Gregory was that almost OCasey was stepping out of his line, stepping out of his lane, and he shouldn't really be writing about things that he didn't have direct experience of. And so one of Yeats' criticisms of the Silver Tassie is, well, you don't know anything about the Great War. implication, well, of course you know about Dublin because you've lived there, so you're entitled to write about that. And it's a very contemporary debate again, isn't it? Who has the right to tell a story? But OCasey always had a really international vision because he was so interested in equality and establishing equality amongst individuals across class, across nation, and sorting out poverty was his key drive. So anything which would investigate kind of what we might now call cant, these political statements which appear to have no value whatsoever. He was very interested in interrogating.
Amazed that none of the great British theatres and indeed the Irish theatres who usually have, when I was growing up, Juno or one of those problems on every year, but in this centenary year, there's not a mention of the great plays that tell that story. No,
it's surprising, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, we may see them next year in 2023, of course.
Oh yes, we can try. We can hope.
So it's interesting, isn't it? Because Yeats wrote a poem after the Easter Uprising in which he expressed concern that some of his reinvigorating of Irish culture might have sent some young boys off to get killed.
Yeah. He's very anxious about the impact of art, and I think OCasey's also anxious about that. What happens when you write a play? What happens what are the consequences of the work you create? And that's why his work is always having a dialogue in between characters. There's always multiple versions of opinions being expressed in OCasey's work, because I think he's sharing the same kind of anxiety as Yeats. He doesn't want to feel like he's being a propagandist or that he's driving a particular viewpoint. He wants the audience to listen and come to their own conclusions. And it's that self-education for him that's crucial to the development of intellectual understanding and political awareness.
And one of the devices he uses to do that, of course, is the fact that each of these three plays has a very strong female character.
Absolutely. And he's trying always, I think, to think about the alternative female vision to a very patriarchal politics. We don't have female representation in Irish politics at this point, and to any great powerful extent. So he's looking always to see, well, what would be the female vision here? What is the other side that we're not hearing in the public narrative? He's giving that female interpretation in his own work.
As well, there were, as you know, the women like Kathleen Lynn and various people who before the Rising were, they were right involved in the struggle.
Yep.
But when James Connolly and all the left, more socialist people got shot and killed during the Rising, the new guys, they were just they didn't want any women around. That was the first thing. Thank you very much. Now go back to your knitting or wherever they perceived it to be.
Exactly.
But so they were cut out of the dialogue as well.
They were certainly cut out of the very high level decision making, and again they were kind of directed into things for women, supporting women, but not seen as equals in the creating of the top level politics.
Yes, Minnie in Shadow of a Gunman is a very interesting character, isn't she? Insofar as it's her glamorization of Devon's mystique as this potential gunman that causes her partly to fall in love with him, but then she ends up being the hero who saves him and ends up, spoiler alert, getting shot.
Yes, quite. Yeah. So, all of this, everyone in the tenement's been worrying about Davron getting shot and Davron being arrested, and in fact, it's the woman who ends up dead. Here we go, which is a bit of a kind of cliche almost, perhaps for us now. It's the woman who seems to die to allow the man to live, but. She dies the heroic death of actually trying to do something to take action, to try and protect the man, to try and sort out the situation. And there's something to be admired, I think, from OCasey's point of view, about a woman who will take charge, who will try to change a narrative, who will who will lead and try to make a difference.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michelle.